Here we are at the site of the Frontenac County Courthouse and Jail. Here we are at the site of the Frontenac County Courthouse and Jail, both built in 1857. The courthouse still stands, and it's the building to your left. It's still the courthouse for Kingston today. Now, the jail that was built at the same time was actually torn down in 1974. See that building over there? That used to be the jailer's house, and the jail was attached to the jailer's house and came out to about where I'm standing now. The rest of this parking lot where you are, that would have been the prison yard, and it was surrounded by a high stone wall. This is the site of all of the hangings in Kingston after 1857. But that's very much the story here. This is the site of all of the hangings in Kingston after 1857. At one point in time, we would have told you that there were 26 hangings that took place here. But the truth is we can't know for certain, because the records that were kept about the executions here, we have evidence to believe they were not well kept, that they're not complete. We can't know for certain. But we do know that the hangings here were very popular events. They said that you always wanted to see a hanging in Kingston because you could see more gruesome detail here than anywhere else. On the day of a hanging, all the prisoners were kept inside the prison, and the prison yard was for spectators. Sometimes there were so many people who wanted to come and watch, they ended up putting benches on the roof of the stable across the street so they could see in over the wall. That stable is actually now the carport for the Hochelaga Inn. All of these people, they would be staring at the wall of the prison that faced out onto the yard, because just below the gallows, that were at the top of the prison wall, just below the gallows through the trapdoor, there was a small room in the prison that was kept very brightly lit. And it had a round window looking out onto the yard. So when they opened the trap and the prisoner fell, the noose would keep the hanging right in front of that window.
Lovely.
So that everyone in the yard could see every last twitch and shudder as they died. Local legend goes, actually, that the glass tower at the top of Macintosh House was put in so that Mrs. Macintosh could have the best seat in the house. And there's actual record of a steamship at the time that made extra money on the side by advertising in advance when there was going to be a hanging, and they would sell passage on their ship to people from around the lake who wanted to come and watch. They say it was the beginning of Kingston's tourist trade, and here we are today. Alrighty. Now, protocol in Upper Canada, Ontario, as it is known, protocol at that time dictated you were hanged where you were sentenced, hence gallows, courthouse, but also you were buried where you were hanged. So every prisoner executed here was buried in the prison yard. When it came time to tearing down the old prison and making this parking lot, they thought it would be a good idea to move those bodies, but as I mentioned, they didn't know exactly how many they were looking for, let alone exactly where to find them. They didn't have money to dig up this entire lot, so they hired a man with a dowsing rod to try and find them. To this man's credit, he did find several bodies. There's no way he found all of them. And so they remain under our feet to this day. Now, there is also a ghost story associated with this spot. You see, for a number of years, the old prison stood here, not really being used before it was actually torn down. And in those years, on nights of a full moon, passers-by would often remark that they saw a man standing and leaning against a part of the old prison. If people walked up to him, they would see that he was very pale, and he had a noose around his neck.
Nice.
If people tried to speak with him, he would disappear altogether. Now, some of the stories of this man were kind of conflicting with each other, but one thing was exactly the same through all of the stories. The man was always seen on the exact same spot. Turned out to be rather important. When they got to tearing down that specific part of the old prison wall, they found a coffin bricked up into the wall. And inside was the body of a man who had been hanged. No one knows why that man was in the wall instead of buried in the yard with all of the others. Our best guess is that perhaps that man was hanged by the guards of the prison without the permission of the courts, and so they had to hide away the evidence of what they'd done. But that's just a theory, we can't prove it. But ever since that body was moved to a local cemetery, that haunting has stopped. No one's seen him since.
Oh.
Even so, there's sometimes strange noises that come from this parking lot late at night. So strange that locals will come to investigate. But when they come to investigate, they find nothing here. Not even students. So even though it may not look like much, this may be one of Kingston's most haunted spots. But there are quite a number of other prisons that are associated with ghost stories. You may know one of them, Kingston Penitentiary. Rather famous, it was the first penitentiary built in British North America, and it opened its doors in 1835. And they stayed open until the prison closed in 2013. So for about 178 years, it was home to the worst criminals in Canada. and a couple good ghost stories. Now, the story I want to share with you actually dates back to 1897, and it's actually recorded in a headline. The headline in Kingston that day was it a ghost or a prisoner trying to escape? You see, it was winter, and 2 guards had been doing the rounds of the prison yard late one winter night. You know, they were treading through that inch of snow that lay on the ground, so it kind of muffles everything. They rounded a corner in the prison yard, and they saw a man in a prisoner's uniform. So, of course, they were raising their rifles, telling him to halt, stop, freeze. But the man simply walked towards the outer wall of the prison, touched the stone, and turned back around, walking, return trajectory, back towards the closest building, which was the old prison hospital. So these guards were freezing, they couldn't get this man to stop. But only when he reached the prison hospital did the man in the prisoner's uniform turn to face the guards, and then he disappeared right in front of their eyes. Now, the disappearing wasn't the thing that shocked the guards the most. What shocked them most is that they recognized him. They recognized him as a prisoner who had died 1 year earlier. They recognized him as a man named George Huell. George Huell was a prisoner at Kingston Penitentiary, and records indicate he was not fairly treated. But he had also had a history of violence against other prisoners. On the day of his death, he was locked in his cell and given tailoring work from the shops in the prison. And later that day, when guards tried to enter his cell, he attacked them with a pair of shears that he'd hidden away. During that altercation, the chief keeper of the prison shot him at close range. Even though George Huell was shot in the head, it took 5 hours for him to actually die. As he was being dragged to the old prison hospital, he told them that he would be back to make them pay for what they'd done. So it seems his prediction came true, even if just for a visit.